Okay, so continuing on this gratitude journey, I will be completely honest. I am encountering a professional frustration that you can't see me, but it's got my ira up and my eyebrow despite getting Botox refreshed this week. But I am grateful for this frustration because it allows me to reach out to my council of elders, my mentors, the individuals that will help guide me through this to come to peace on the other side. And y'all, that's what today's episode is about. There are frustrations that we will encounter professionally. Racism, sexism, ableism, to name a few. And there is hope in this world for improvement. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Feel free to put a prayer on working through our trials so that we can maybe not walk in a valley, but find you a mountaintop. All right. Hi, folks, and welcome to First Bite, Fed, Fun, and Functional, a speech therapy podcast sponsored by SpeechTherapyPD.com. I am your host on this nerd venture, Michelle Dawson, MS, CCC-SLP, CLC, the All Things Peds SLP. I am a colleague in the trenches of home health early intervention right there with you. I run my own private practice, Heartwood Speech Therapy, here in Coletown, South Carolina. And I guest lecture nationwide on best practices for early intervention for the medically complex and fragile child. First Bite's mission is short and sweet, to bring light, hope, knowledge, and joy to the pediatric clinician, parent, or advocate.
By way of a nerdy conversation, so there's plenty of laughter too.
In this podcast, we cover everything from AAC to breastfeeding,
ethics on how to run a private practice,
pediatric dysphagia to clinical supervision,
and all other topics in the world of pediatric speech pathology. Our goal is to bring evidence-based practice straight to you by interviewing subject matter experts.
To break down the communication barriers so that we can access the knowledge of their fields.
Or, as a close friend says, to build the bridge.
By bringing other professionals and experts in our field together, we hope to spark advocacy, joy, and passion for continuing to grow and advance care for our little ones.
Every fourth episode, I join in. I'm Erin Forward, MSP, CCC-SLP, the Yankee by way of Rochester, New York transplant who actually inspired this journey. I bring a different perspective, that of a newish clinician with experience in early intervention, pediatric acute care, and nonprofit pediatric outpatient settings.
So sit back, relax, and watch out for all our squirrels and enjoy this geeky gig brought to you by SpeechTherapyPD.com. Hey, this is Michelle Dawson, and I need to update my disclosure statements. So my non-financial disclosures. I actively volunteer with Feeding Matters, National Foundation of Swallowing Disorders, NFOSD, Dysphagia Outreach Project, DOP. I am a former treasurer with the Council of State Association Presidents, CSAP, a past president of the South Carolina Speech, Language, and Hearing Association, SCISHA, a current Board of Trustees member with the Communication Disorders Foundation of Virginia, and I am a current member of ASHA SIG 13, SCISHA, the Speech Language Hearing Association of Virginia, SHAV, a member of the National Black Speech Language Hearing Association in Basel, and Dysphagia Research Society, DRS. Additionally, I volunteer with ASHA as the topic chair for the Pediatric Feeding Disorder Planning Committee for the ASHA 2023 convention in Boston, and I hope you make it out there. My financial disclosures include receiving compensation for First Bite podcast from SpeechTherapyPD.com, as well as from additional webinars and for webinars associated with Understanding Dysphagia, which is also a podcast with SpeechTherapyPD.com. And I currently receive a salary from the University of South Carolina in my work as adjunct professor and student services coordinator, and I receive royalties from the sale of my book, Chasing the Swallow: Truth, Science, and Hope for Pediatric Feeding and Swallowing Disorders, as well as compensation for the CEUs associated with it from speechtherapypd.com. So those are my current disclosure statements. Thanks, guys.
The views and opinions expressed in today's podcast do not reflect the organizations associated with the speakers and are their views and opinions solely.
All right, everybody. I have a special episode. I know this month of September is the Erin and Karen takeover for interprofessional education for interprofessional practice, but I was so excited about our guest today that I squeezed her into the lineup. So huzzah for that. So today's guest, I'm hoping that you have read this article. If you haven't, I'm going to go ahead and it'll be hyperlinked into the show notes. I think that's the word that we use, hyperlink. I don't know. Uni will make me cool. But I have none other than Dr. Dani Scott, who recently wrote Pathway to Dismantling Systemic Racism in CSD. She is with the Minnesota State University. You can find her article within the ASHA Leader. And I've kind of like fangirled her for a while on like social media. And then I like said hi and, you know, those kind of things through social media. And then when I saw her at Embosla, I was like, Michelle, don't be awkward. But like I have social anxiety. And so like I am a little awkward like a turtle. And I like, you know, got my courage up and I went up and I said, hi. So huzzah. She said hello back and here she is. So Dr. Scott, thank you so much for coming on.
Of course. And I thank you for, you know, speaking to me at Embosla because I just loved your energy. And then I got to learn about this podcast. I didn't know about it before, but I think it's absolutely incredible. So I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you for connecting.
Thank you. Yes. And folks, this woman she is a powerhouse in the world of DEI and changing our profession and moving it forward. So I am like incredibly humbled to be able to hold this conversation with her. And we're going to talk about hard things. And I am aware that some of you that are listening find this uncomfortable. Trust me, I have been there. I go there, but we have to sit in the uncomfortable to grow and move forward because our profession needs to be a reflection of the beautiful tapestry that is the world. So
Yes.
there's my opener to go there with us. But Dr. Dani, as with all things, I like to get the backstory on all of our guests. So how did you hear about the world of speech pathology and how did you get into it? And then what did you study for your PhD? I know that's like a string of questions.
Yes.
I love all of these things.
Okay. So I'll start. I started as a psychology major in undergrad. So I went to Spelman College, which is a historically Black college for women, the #1 HBCU, BT Dubs, if you didn't know. And so I had a wonderful experience there. And I was a psychology major because it's a liberal arts institution. So there is no speech language pathology. I was double majoring in psychology and comparative women's studies. And so during my time there, I was like, I think I want to be a women's counselor. But then I kept really getting interested in like education. And that's kind of, I always thought I would be a teacher, but then I like changed my mind when I realized teachers don't get paid that much. And so I was like, how much does a psychologist make? Okay, I'll do that. And so I'm in the psychology major, which I love because I love just learning about how we think, how we move, right? And I was doing research in psychology and I was so bored because the research was on motor development, but I was really interested in language development, didn't even know it was a thing. And my advisor, I could tell she would get a little frustrated with me and my lack of interest in her study. And she was like, you should just be a speech language pathologist. And I was like, I don't know what that is. And then as soon as she said it, I remembered that my freshman year, we had a speech therapist come in and talk to my psychology class. Put in my back pocket, was like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. And so I really seriously thought about it. In the research study we were doing on motor development, there was a little girl who, it was like a longitudinal study for toddlers. And there was a little girl and she was like 1, but she was using 3-word sentences. And I was obsessed with her. Turns out her mom was a speech therapist. Also went to I said, I don't know what you're doing with your child, but I'm mesmerized and I want to learn more about this. So that was really kind of my opening. I didn't even apply, like, I didn't even know that I was going to be applying to these programs. Like, I was applying to PhD programs in psychology, completely put a hold on that, and started applying to SLP programs. I took an intro course at Georgia State because we didn't have an intro course. And I took that. I was like, 100%, this is what I want to do. Had no idea the demographics of our profession, had no idea of kind of like the technical part. I just knew I wanted to help people. And I was so interested in language. And that's really kind of where brought me here. But I think the profession chose me. I didn't choose it, because for it to be such a perfect fit, I know that was like divinely ordained.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. So I was talking to Gerald yesterday, which, folks, that's really technically not coming out to November. So just like pretend you didn't hear me say that, like, I recorded it. And I told him I have an idea for a caucus. What if we had an SLPs of Faith caucus, right? Where we had different faiths. I get excited and a cold chill. Like, what if we had all these different faiths come together for the purpose of learning from one another, so that we can learn about their holidays, how they honor these, how they celebrate these, the foods, the customs, because those are our patients, our students, our clients, and our colleagues, and not for one is better than another, because they're not.
Yeah, it's not comparison.
Yes, but because you know what? I have sat for 250 episodes we have recorded, and almost every single guest speaker has said the exact same thing. They felt a calling, and that it's just, how freaking cool is that? I just love that. Yes. Okay. So where did you go to grad school then?
Because I started applying late, I just didn't know that this was going to be a thing. I was like, Phi Beta Cap. I was class president. I had a really high GPA. And I was just like, of course I'm going to get in wherever I want because I'm fabulous. Yeah. So no. So I got denied to, like, I applied to 6 schools, got denied to 4. And the 2 that I did get into, it would happen very late in the game. And so, knowing what I know about admissions now, I'm not surprised, but that happened to me. And so that is another reason why I'm so passionate about holistic admissions and DEI. But, anyway,
I promise.
Yeah. So didn't know all of that, but I was literally getting denied left and right. I decided to teach abroad in China for a year because I was like, well, if I don't get into grad school, I just need to buy some time. And then it turned out that as soon as I committed to teaching abroad, I got into grad school. And so I ended up going to Indiana University, Bloomington. They let me defer for a year and I got my master's there. Worked for a while in Atlanta, moved to Houston and worked. And then I started my PhD program back in psychology where it all started. So my PhD is actually in psychology with the emphasis in cognition and instruction.
Oh my gosh. So what was your dissertation on then?
So my dissertation is on therapeutic relationships. So how we're building relationships as school-based SLPs working with culturally and linguistically diverse students.
You need to meet Erin, my co-host, because, oh my God, Erin, this is for you, honey. Her undergrad is psych from University of Pitt. She got her master's from University of South Carolina. She was my student. This is the whole reason we have the podcast. Is she said, let's do a podcast for early intervention SLPs, expedite research to practice. Here we are. But her primary focus is on relationship building. And she focuses on therapeutic use of self and has all of the advanced trainings for DEI floor time, trauma sensitive and informed. I always butcher it. I'm sorry, Erin, you'd think I would know this by now. But she wants to go back and get a PhD in psychology to study relationships.
Yes. Well, we have to connect. That was so, it's shocking that, well, I think what we are required to take that one psychology class, but I was just so, I loved getting my PhD in psychology because I feel like speech is very clinical and I needed something to give me more foundation to the meaning of what we do. And so I felt like I was very hyper focused on skills, and not, but if you don't have this relationship, if you don't build that rapport, if you don't have a strong emotional bond, you're not going to accomplish any skills.
Yes, but is that taught within the framework of the Big Nine? No, it is.
No.
But okay, so then wearing my professor hat, wearing my director of Clin Ed hat, this is the piece that it is absolutely critical. Yes, we have to teach dynamic assessments. We have to teach data collection. However, you will have no data to study and analyze if you don't first engage therapeutic use of self, which is honestly, in my opinion, predicated on where are you within yourself and how are you straight, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how are you aligned to be ready to help another person on their journey?
Yeah.
But,
I know.
So
and
many things.
I get to teach a whole class on that here at MSU Mankato. So I teach a graduate elective. So this is a second year graduate course. It's called DEI seminar. So the focus is still diversity, equity, and inclusion, but we're focusing really on how to build therapeutic relationships and how to use cultural humility to facilitate those relationships, because the research is showing that stronger cultural humility, stronger therapeutic relationships. So how do you really build those relationships, especially with your diverse clients, especially when it is more common to have a cultural disconnect between the client and the therapist than not? How do you get through that experience? How do you maintain and build a relationship so that you can have the therapeutic outcomes that you want to have? So we have a whole class on that. It's like, I say that's my favorite, but all my classes are my favorite. So, but it is one of my favorites.
I am making a note to give you a call after the recording because I have an idea.
Yes, I teach it in the fall. It's wonderful.
That's amazing. I'm kind of wondering if I can audit that from a distance. Okay.
You can be a guest in our class if you would like to.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. This is, okay. I have a few ideas. I'm going to hold them. Okay. So you're doing this within the framework of your school, and you're reaching out to colleagues through journal writing, which is profound. But let's take it back to the core. How do you define diversity, equity, and inclusion as it relates to you and your work? But also, what about, and y'all, this is not a political statement. This is a statement of facts. I truly feel that DEI is under attack, especially in certain states of our union. Not all states, but certain states. And it should not be. So now the it should not be is my opinion, but it's a very strong held soapbox of an opinion. But
it is 100% on attack. And I would venture to say has always been under attack in this country and throughout the world.
Yeah.
So one of the things I posted about this, because I was like, we're saying DEI is under attack, but the terminology is newer terminology. Like people, Fannie Lou Hamer wasn't saying I'm a DEI activist, right? She was a civil rights activist. And so DEI has been a movement where the name might have changed, but this movement towards justice has always been going on, and it has always been under attack. The thing about DEI, I feel like in order for me to engage in the work, I have to constantly define what that means, because I think the foundation of the attack is under the premise that people don't know what diversity, equity, and inclusion mean. They think it means propaganda. They think it means brainwashing. They think it means anger, like I have no idea. The things I've heard, it all comes from a lack of understanding of what it is, and also just a resistance to talking about things that make you uncomfortable. So I'm constantly thinking about, well, what does this mean and how does that directly apply to the work that I do? And I think that as speech language pathologists is something that we have to constantly reflect on, because we work with people. We work with people. We may work on skills, but we work with people. So the diversity piece is kind of the most glaring, which is we want lots of differences and, being able to celebrate across lines of difference, and also from an intersectional place. So knowing that you aren't just your race, you aren't just your sexuality, you aren't just your religion, but there is an intersection and you stand there and you have all these different identities, some of them being marginalized and some of them being privileged. So yes, diversity is a celebration of all lines of difference, but can you truly celebrate lines of difference when, if those differences were present, there is exclusion or barriers? So to me, the inclusion and equity pieces are the biggest pieces and really the goal of the work. Inclusion being, how are people have historically, who has been left out? And if they have been there, has their voice been amplified? Do they have a seat at the table? Do they feel like they belong? Is it a climate of hostility? Is it a climate truly of welcoming people and highlighting their strengths? So that's like the inclusion part. And then the equity piece is where people are constantly confusing that with like equality. We want to give everyone the same rights. No, we don't. We want to give everyone what they need to thrive, whether that's health equity. We want to give everyone what they need to thrive and be a healthy person and enjoy their life, or educational equity, whatever that looks like. But it is not the same for every single person, because every single person doesn't start at the same place. And then the justice piece, some people add the J to DEIJ. That is the ultimate goal of where, if I can't accomplish those things, we're going to have to change the structure. Sometimes structures are too broken to put a Band-Aid on it. And we actually have to shift a structure that is not working. And I think that's the part that really scares people, because we're like, well, we've always done it this way. I don't think we can change it.
That's the worst thing we can say is we've always done it this way. If we've always done it that way, then retire and let's do it different.
And let's do it differently. So it scares, the justice part scares people, but I think the acknowledgement that some structures are so dysfunctional, we have to chip away at it so that we can get to the change. Putting Band-Aids on is not going to work. And sometimes I think diversity is a Band-Aid. Well, we just need more diverse people. Why? So you can harm them mentally because the climate is so hostile, so that they enter a space where there are so many barriers that they feel beaten down every single day, to where they don't even, have a voice to make a change. Then no, the structure has to change.
I am trying to find the book and I cannot find, because everything's boxed up. I'm so sorry, Dr. Dani. But folks, there's a really good book that I highly recommend. And it is a funny, joyful, and hard read. It's called Abolitionist. Oh my gosh, where? It's on
Bettina Love?
No. Hold on. It's on my Goodreads. It is called, do you have Goodreads app? I love the Goodreads app.
I use the website all the time.
Yes. It's Amazon's Abolitionists and Activists, a graphic history of women's fights for their rights. And it's by Mickey Kendall and illustrated by A. Dimaco. Forgive me. It's Italian, D with the apostrophe, amico. Erin would show me how to do this. She is Italian. But this book, when she talks about diversity always being under attack, this book takes women's rights and the rights, and not white Caucasian women and transgender women, all the way back to the beginning of time, and analyzes leadership and trials and tribulations that they overcame and succumbed to in their perpetual march forward. And it
Mm-hmm.
takes heroines like Susan B. Anthony is a heroine of mine, right? But it also talks about the fact that while she was a huge activist for women's right to vote, it was white women's right to vote. She did not act, which I had no knowledge about until I read about this and then went to the Susan B. Anthony house, right? I knew one version of the history. We're not told the full version of the history, and there's reasons, right? Racist reasons, but they are there. And that book does a really good job of presenting material in a way that allows you to be uncomfortable, but still
Mm-hmm.
fills you with hope for the future, right? And when you think of when you were describing equity, I have to paint pictures in my heads with the words of the people that I'm learning from because I'm a
Yeah.
very visual learner, right? So when I think of equity, folks, I think of when she says we all don't start at the same place, right? That's what she said. Think about the patients that we serve that have limb differences that may require adaptive equipment to move around. Are we going to take away their adaptive equipment and then expect them to be equally mobile within the environment? No, because we don't have universal adaptations, which is a whole conversation for another podcast. But I do recommend that everybody listen to that episode on 99% Invisible because it's freaking amazing. But we give people resources so that they can physically engage, right? We
Mm-hmm.
have that for our patients. Why don't we do that for our colleagues that are of a different ethnic, religious background? That
Mm-hmm.
that's how it processes in my head. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you encounter that, I mean, how do we move it forward? How do we engage in within our profession anti-racism? Because if we also, I filtered this through the framework of my entire academic experience. And I'm the oldest of 5. We didn't have a lot of money for college. So I got my associate's degree first. I always knew I wanted to be a speech pathologist. I knew I had to get my master's, but there was not a lot of money. So I did community college, worked a couple jobs, probably too many jobs, did undergrad at Old Dominion University, worked several jobs. I mean, it took me longer to graduate than most, but I had to work to live. And then
Mm-hmm.
worked full time as an SLT while I got my master's degree online because there's no monies.
Yeah.
And this is how we survived to make it to that was what was in my family's cards, right? And all of that education, I only had one professor of color, Dr. Norman, who ended up being my colleague, but I still can't call her by her first name because she will always be Dr. Norman. And she was like, just call me Michelle. And I'm like, no, I feel disrespectful. But like that, but if we look at the world, that's not representative.
At
So
all.
how do we fight anti-racism? What do we do?
Well, I think one of the things is we have got to shift this conversation of this is not personal. This is not for people who are interested. This is a matter of ethics. And
Mhm.
it blows my mind that we have full conversations about ethics. And DEI is not a part of the conversation. Anti-racism is not a part of the conversation. And these are ethical concerns. So if our profession is truly concerned about ethics, the same energy we give to where you have to, you have to be an ethical SLP, you have to do this, then it also that same energy needs to go towards these issues. And the issues are not happenstance. The issues are not a coincidence. It is not a coincidence that you only have one Black or one Black professor. It is not a coincidence that in 2023, I am the first Black tenure track faculty member in this department. That's not a coincidence. That is structurally, it was meant to be that way. The same way that you had to work through school, and it probably wasn't easy because graduate programs are made for middle to upper class white women who can afford to not work for 2 to 3 years to get a master's degree.
I worked full-time in the public schools when I was going to grad school. I waited tables on the weekends. Ruby Tuesdays, you saved my skin. You fed me at night. I put on a lot of weight in grad school, but they had really good turkey cheese sandwiches.
Oh, don't get me started on Ruby Tuesdays. Oh my God. Okay, we'll have a side conversation on Ruby Tuesdays and what we ordered.
Man, I'm a sucker for the croutons, and they literally have the best honey mustard. I will fight over their honey mustard. Yes,
literally. But there's so many barriers. It's not just, there's barriers for people of color. There's barriers based on class. There's barriers based on your sexual identity, orientation, your gender identity. It's just, there's so many barriers. And so we can't say, if we really want this profession to look like the world, to look like the people that are sitting in front of us seeking services, then the barriers, the exclusion, there's no way we can't address that.
So I thought I knew how it worked to get into grad school, right? And I laugh, right? Because everybody that's listening, you probably knew you had to take the GREs, you had to get good grades, you had to do this, and this, right? But that's outsider looking in. And then I became faculty, and the inside piece of the faculty, the process for reviewing applications, the process for acceptance, those are the things that on this side of the table have to be systematically changed.
Yeah.
Because they must. Because if we don't make those changes, and I do want to get into the specifics, y'all, because it's kind of, if you haven't been on this side, it doesn't make sense what happens behind the scenes. It's just this mysterious application process, and you're either in or you're out. But also the simple raising awareness about our profession. I had Lauren Hastings on.
Yeah.
And I love her. She is vivacious. When she talks, it's just yes. But she and I were talking about it, and she said, when you're a Black woman in the South, you don't hear about the field of speech pathology unless you know someone, because it's not like they show up at job fairs.
Yeah.
And that's something. So my first call to action, if you are listening to this podcast and you are a member of NISHLA, if you're a faculty member and a NISHLA advisor, if you sit on your state association, if you are a volunteer with your state association, there are built-in systems within those organizations that you can reach out to low-income areas, to areas that have high minority status, and attend their career days. We can do this. And you can have your volunteers from NISHLA, you can have your volunteers from your state association go and have a booth. And those opportunities would just at least put the fields of speech pathology and audiology out. And I think those are actionable items that could easily be accomplished that I would love to see come to fruition.
Absolutely. Right? I'll give you an example. So in a class that I teach, 541 Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion SLP education settings. We are about to, in 2 weeks, there are different camps that come to the university under the umbrella of our institutional diversity. So they usually have a social justice camp, a Native camp, an Asian American camp. And they're high schoolers. They come on campus, giving them the college experience for a short amount of time. And so last year, I did a presentation on African American English with the attendees of the social justice camp. And I said, oh my gosh, what an opportunity to expose our profession to high schoolers, but also to empower the diverse speakers that the way they talk is completely valid and they should show up how they need to show up because their language is a part of their culture. And so this year, as a part of the class, we have created the graduate students have created a linguistic justice conference, and it's going to be just an hour where we are inviting the students, the high school students of the Asian American camp, to come to our building, and we're going to do different topics related to linguistic justice, like being proud of your accent. What are advantages to being bilingual? What is our profession, and why do we need more diversity? Why do we need more DEI? And then also we're talking about like communication and justice in the justice system. We're talking about being proud of your accent. Have you experienced discrimination? How to just, overcome that. And so not only are we empowering them based on the knowledge that we have about linguistic diversity, but we're exposing them to the field in an hour. What if one of those high schoolers leaves and says, I have never heard about speech language pathology, but I think I might want to go to college for that?
And then what if they go to college for that and then become a clinician or a researcher? And then how many lives are they going to positively impact through therapeutic skill delivery, through advent of new evidence-based approaches, but also the impact that they're going to have within their personal community to represent our profession there?
Absolutely. Exponentially, it's about seeds, and it doesn't take a lot of time. It takes intention to plant seeds, but it doesn't take a lot of time. This is things we already know. This is things that graduate students already feel comfortable talking about because they've been learning about it. And so, when it comes to like diversifying our field, a lot of it has to do with exposure of our field to people who have been, really excluded or just don't know because they don't have an aunt that was a speech therapist. They don't have a cousin who has their own private practice and they can go shadow someone.
Mm-hmm. I had a student who had a cousin who was an OT, and that's how she found out about speech pathology.
Yeah.
But I mean, sorry, just that you said that, I was like,
Yeah.
I literally heard that happen. But this is okay. So we can do outreach, and it's feasible, and it doesn't. Those kind of moments, that is one afternoon in the grand scheme of your life that you can tithe of your time. You don't necessarily, I mean, maybe you have to get gas. And I mean, normally if you got students there, I'm going to feed the students. So I'll bake something for them or like bring them food. I try to avoid pizza because pizza, like everybody brings students pizza.
Yeah.
But also I really like to bake. It's like a passion. I have perfected my lemon blueberry cake with layers of fresh blueberries. And it is.
Oh my goodness, that sounds so good.
I will have to send you a picture because it's really pretty. Because I even curl my lemon rinds. Baking makes my heart happy. My tummy not so much, but my heart. Okay, so can we talk about what it looks like within the acceptance side to programs? Like when students apply to get in, we're not taught about the inherent biases of standardized assessments. But when we get into it, there's so many inherent biases of standardized assessments. The ones that come to my mind right off the top are, who are they normed off of? And so normally, like especially with respect to the assessments that we use for our patients, they tend to be upper middle class white males and faculty, professors, students, their own children, right? And that's not for all of them, folks, but like for a good majority of them. But down to the vocabulary that is selected is predominantly standard English. And if you're not exposed to standard English, if you didn't grow up with that, knowing the words in the assessments has an implicit racist bias. So those are factors that come to my mind. what are ones that like pop up that you're like, oh, bing, bing,
Well, I
bing?
mean, one thing you said, we are not taught about the inherent bias. We are taught about the inherent bias in standardized assessments. We are not taught what else do we use because we can't depend on these. Everyone talks about it in grad school, but then there's no solution. Or they say you should do dynamic assessment as if there is not tons of research on dynamic assessment, and then actually explicitly teaching what that looks like, what it looks like to go to your place of work and advocate for, no, I'm not using that standardized assessment because everybody else here uses it, because it doesn't work for my client. I'm actually going to do this and I'm not reporting that score. And you can't tell me it's mandatory. We don't teach our students to advocate, to do other things other than standardized assessments. So it's not that we don't know. And then also, if you're a person of color, you know by personal experience that standardized assessments are biased. You know that there is bias because you have personally experienced that in your education, time and time again. So it's like we know it, but we don't do anything. We don't act. And I think that acting has to be very intentional and very deliberate. And it takes work. It takes work to say, well, if I just gave the standardized test, I would get a score. And then I know that this number means they didn't do good, and this number means they did good. And that just gives me a security versus I'm going to do this language sample and I'm going to actually use the knowledge that I learned in graduate school. And I don't need a standardized assessment to tell me if someone has difficulty learning the language of their community. So I think we have it. We don't do it. We don't activate it. We don't empower our students to go into their workplace and like hold the line for settings where they're like, oh no, everyone uses this one. You can just pull that out the closet. You can do that with everyone. We don't teach them that.
So in my clinic class, if a student sat through my clinic class and comes back and says, then I call bumpkus because I know for a fact that I taught them this. But I also went to the point that we didn't even allow the PLS-5 to be utilized. That was off the shelf because of, folks, if you're listening, go back. I'm clapping my hands. I'm opinionated. Go back and read the PLS-5 validity study that ASHA put out probably 9 years ago, because it was between my children being born. This is how I remembered the time frame of the test, where they talk about how that test doesn't even accurately capture students that do have a disability because it inflates their score one standard deviation, right? So we pulled that. Like, you're not doing that. And guess what? So many school districts love to use the PLS-5 because children don't qualify. But like, why don't they qualify? Because you've used a test that is like not appropriately validated or normed. So, and if you're listening and you're like, oh, well, I only have an hour. Okay. So then in that hour, if you can't transcribe that language sample, let's troubleshoot this. Are you getting consent to film from the caregiver at the start of your evaluation? Because you can film your eval and then go back and transcribe it earlier. Are you sitting down in an early intervention? Are you truly doing the routines-based interview? Because if we're doing the routines-based interview, then we're actually sitting there and deep diving into this family's culture, into this family's being, and finding out where this child's communication, articulation, phonological impairment, or their pediatric feeding and swallowing disorder, how it's impacting the child accessing their ADLs, their daily routines. And it tells you how to plug in your skill set to engage in caregiver coaching to help this family move forward, right? We have those tools. You just have to think outside of, unfortunately, outside of the box and maybe outside of what you had been taught, which.
And continue to seek the education. The education is there. I mean, even, I love our multicultural constituency groups like in Basla and, Latinx Caucus and Asian Pacific Islander Caucus for providing very unique, I think the most unique professional development opportunities, but even ASHA has professional development opportunities that teach us to get out of our very like monolingual, box and really think about how are we best serving our CLD population in regard to assessment and diagnosis. So the information is out there, but I think people are resting on what we have always done and not, saying this is a barrier, this is a problem. Misdiagnosis is a huge problem in our field, and we have to fully be intentional about disengaging in that.
Mm-hmm. Folks, in May, we had two representatives from the Asian Pacific Islander Caucus on the podcast. So please go back and check that episode out, because when you listen to them, they even offer supports for colleagues that are non-members. So if you have an eval for a child and you don't speak the language that they speak, if you have a referral, if you're unsure of where to start, you can reach out to that organization, and they have individuals who tithe of their time to help with teaching you about correct sound production, giving you better insight into the language, what is typical versus potentially delayed or disordered. So they offer that for free, which is amazing. But that is, yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how do we move forward within faculty? Like, do we eliminate the practice? What do we do?
I wish we could, right? Okay, so I think this would be a good time for me to just explain some of the things I'm doing in my role. And it's not to highlight me at all, but it's just to give example to this is what it looks like to engage in the work. And I will say, when I took this position, I was so excited about it. I was like, oh, I can do this. I can do this. And I had a very shallow idea of what the work looked like. So, in my role, if you look up my job description, it was like the main two things: you are going to teach our diversity, equity, and inclusion courses, and you are going to mentor this diversity and inclusion fellows cohort that we started when I came here. And I was like, I can do those things. I love students. I was a student of color. And at the time I was in my PhD program. So I am a student of color, and I'm so passionate about these courses, and I know I can do that. But there is so much more to that. And it's not easy. So in the teaching portion, one of the things that faculty need to do is to seriously decolonize their curriculum and require DEI specific courses. Yes, you need to infuse diversity, equity, inclusion into your curriculum. It cannot just be the one Asian professor, the one Black professor, the one LGBTQIA professor to talk about these things. It does need to be included in the entire curriculum. And you need to have designated, required courses on the undergraduate and the graduate level to talk about these issues. I get a class and I'm like, DEI is such a huge topic. I'm missing things, but I have a class. Some people don't even get a whole class. So I have a couple of classes. On our curriculum, we added a cultural humility course at the undergraduate level. And then in our graduate courses, we already had a multicultural issues class, and we changed the name to culturally responsive practices. And it's broken up into a complete class and a lab portion that's a little more practical. We have a diversity, equity, inclusion class for medical settings and education settings. And then on top of that, I teach an elective graduate course called DEI Seminar, where we focus on building therapeutic relationships using cultural humility. So that is a lot. But then not only is it just teaching the content, but really becoming skilled in knowledge, the whole faculty, on anti-oppressive pedagogy. So it's not just enough to teach the content, but you have to change the way you are teaching the content so that you can meet the needs of this generation of students, who is incredibly diverse and does not look anything like what we have seen before. And then we got COVID on top of that. So people need compassion, people need flexibility, people need structures and classes that are inclusive and highly structured, and all the things. So the teaching is not just the content, it's not just what you teach, it's how you teach. And then when it comes to mentoring students, it can't just be an effort to recruit diverse students. And in our school, our diversity and inclusion fellows is really focusing on racial ethnic diversity, because here we are in Minnesota where there is not a lot of racial ethnic diversity at all. And so that is an area that we're focusing on. And not only is the recruitment intentional, but it's the retention that is intentional. And so in my Ask the Leader article, I talk about how we developed a task force because I wanted it to be an organic experience for the students to have a seat at the table, to make change in regard to equity issues that actually affect them, but then also to have a built-in community of support, not just with the faculty of color, but also with the other students of color that are in their cohort. So that takes a lot of intention, really thinking about not how are we going to recruit the students, but how are we going to get these students through this program, not by the skin of their teeth, but thrive through this program and be able to enter this profession as an advocate, because as a person of color, you have to be an advocate in a lot of different ways. And then I guess another thing when it comes to professional education and bringing the community along, hopefully as your department develops in their knowledge of diversity, equity, inclusion, that they are having opportunities where other supervisors in the area, clinical supervisors or other people are really tapping into that knowledge too. Because I think a lot of times higher education entities kind of like hold all the knowledge to themselves. And there are SLPs all in the community that need some of these things too. And so like being a leader in wherever you are to provide professional education and opportunities to other organizations. So those are some of the things I think we could start on in regard to, in the faculty role, what can we do to kind of activate diversity, equity, and inclusion?
I'm thinking back on the things that I didn't know when I went into academia, and which is a lot of things on the list.
Right.
Bell didn't know. There's like a lot, but also how to perpetually implementation science, how to do it better, how to do more, right? Take what you've done and then reassess. Okay, so folks, if you haven't heard of the term implementation science, Dr. Rebecca Wada was my very first person to teach me about implementation science. Becca got her PhD. Oh, Becca, I'm going to screw this all up. From Nevada. I think it was Nevada. And it was in COMD, but it was implementation sciences. And the short answer is you put a process in place, right? But it's not enough just to put a process in place. As my youngest son, he had a hearing impairment for the first several years. And so we had a lot of speech therapy. So sometimes we get words wrong, in irregular past tense. Our tick is caught up and fine, but like word selection, I mean, he couldn't hear for a few years. So he always says make birth instead of give birth. So but like you're going to make birth to something, to an idea. But when it's out there, you have to systematically go back and reassess as you get new information. How do you make it better? Right? So as you're talking about this, I come back to, for those of us that are in a position to teach, that means that we can't use the same syllabus every single semester, every single year, which I have seen. You're like, we have to go. We can't use the exact same filmed videos again and again and again. We have to reassess those. And as I say that, I know the immense pressure that faculty is under, but this is what we're charged to do. So go back and reassess. As a department, do you have explicit guidelines for your syllabus that include DEI goals? Do you highlight within that syllabus targeted activities? And do you have a program within your university that you can go to say, hey, please review this, make it better, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are opportunities. Also, guest speakers. I love guest speakers in my classes.
Yes.
One, selfishly, it does give me a minute to come up for air so I don't have to prep for that class. Let's all be honest. We've all had that thought.
For sure.
But two, it is so exciting to me to sit there in my class and watch another colleague light everybody up. And
Mm-hmm.
feel that in myself, right? But when they share their passion, so if you're faculty and you have the opportunity to have an invited speaker, let's critically analyze who we're inviting. Let's make sure
Mm-hmm.
that when we're sitting and we're seeking out speakers, are they members of, to piggyback on Kendra T. Allison's 8% Summit, are they members of the 8%? And how do we grow this? Because if you have one student in your class who doesn't look like everybody else, let's grow that and fill their cup. Just like you said, you have to reach out. You have to be intentional with retention. So,
Mm-hmm.
just some thoughts. What do you think? Am I nuts?
No, absolutely. The retention piece is huge. The recruitment, yes, there's so many steps to the recruitment, but I think I didn't even fully conceptualize what retention looked like. Our first year, even when we have our diversity fellows, and I just love all of them. And out of the 15 that we've had, 7 have just graduated and 8 are in our program now. They are all very different. They have so many different strengths and weaknesses individually, but then also collectively, they show up different. I think like the first group, we were just all trying to figure it out together because I'm new. We started this program and it was just a different vibe. The second group, the way they have come together to go to activities together, to study together, the way I've been able to see them grow clinically because they've had even more clinical opportunities than our last cohort has been beautiful. And so the biggest thing is like everyone needs something different, even within the diversity. Like we are like, you can't just say, oh, they're diverse and try to clump people together. Like every cohort is different. Each of them are different. They have different needs. Their representation needs are different. I'm a Black woman and I feel like in our fellows, I have like maybe natural connection to some other Black women. But then, like, when it comes to maybe an Asian student, I'm constantly thinking about, okay, how do I connect in this way to really think about like their upbringing and their experience that could be different from mine? And like, how am I meeting them where they are? I think about if I say the same message to each student, I'm going to say it differently just because of I know how they respond to me. And so the intricacies of those relationships in order to maintain the retention has to be very intentional. It's not just enough to be like, well, you have this person here and you can mentor across all these lines. I've had to also learn about disability. I've had to learn about things that aren't my experience. Like I'm a cisgender heterosexual woman. So I do need to be intentional about learning about an experience that's not like mine so I can reach my students in every area. And I wish that more professors would do that. Like the reaching and the connection is just as important as the teaching and the skills that you're giving them.
Yes. I almost fell out of my seat. I got so excited. Did you know there's a disability caucus?
What'd you say?
ASHA has a disability caucus.
Yes.
I think that's amazing. So if you identify with a disability, if that's part of who you are, they have a caucus. And I will never forget, Brianne, if you're listening, I love you. One of my very dear friends is Brianne, and she has a feeding tube, and she loves that she has like a J tube. So she's got like her permanent, but she also does feeding therapy. So the patients that she treats have like the same equipment, and she's able to represent them and show them that you can do this and look like us and still thrive, right? And we were at ASHA in, wait, where was ASHA last year? New Orleans. And she saw the caucus, and oh my God, the stars that hit her eyes was just like, bah! And then she bolted right over to it. But representation matters. And that was huge. But oh, I had a second thought. It's gone. I got all excited. But yes.
It matters. And I think, us as faculty, we have to constantly be thinking about our blind spots and so that we can meet students where they are, and not constantly think about them, but constantly learn. I took like a disability justice course a couple weeks ago, and am really trying to be intentional. Here at our institution, our the state system, they have lots of courses they offer all the time, and most of them are really great. They're online, they're virtual. So there's things out there, but it's like, yeah, do I really want to take a class while I'm teaching 4 classes? Not really. Not really, but I did it because I'm like, no, this is important. I got to make the time to do this. You know what I mean? And so because it's about intersectional diversity. So while I'm very comfortable talking about race and focusing on racial equity as a Black woman, like I know that people are not just their race. And I know that I could be talking to a Black woman who also has a disability, who is also, a lesbian, or, all these different areas of difference. And we have to constantly be thinking about those and we're self-reflecting on our blind spots so that we can make those genuine connections with the students, but also with our clients, of course.
It is. When I first started holding these conversations on the podcast, I was 100% uncomfortable the entire time. And this is just me being like totally raw and honest. I worried. It has been instilled in me since I was a little girl to mind your manners and to be kind, right? If I didn't say Mr. or Ms. or yes, ma'am, or no, sir, I mean, there was consequences, right? Like that was how I was raised. And the first time I realized that upbringing was not how the rest of the world engaged. I was in Arizona. I was an invited lecturer to ARSHA. And so I was out in Arizona presenting, and a woman came in to present after me, and I was cleaning up. And she was an older woman, probably late 70s, had a cane. So I am going to do how I was raised. My grandma raised me. I am going to clean it up, set it up, get her set for success. I made sure I was down on eye level. Yes, ma'am. How can I help you? Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And she said, if you yes, ma'am, me one more time, you little Southern lady, I'm going to take this cane and bop you with it. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. I meant no offense. But like that was, and she goes, we don't ma'am around here. She goes, that means things you don't know. But I didn't even know that I didn't know that there was, it was just me just trying to be helpful, right? So when we first started DEI and A interviews, I was 100% uncomfortable the entire time and afraid. Couldn't be, I felt like authentically myself because I was going to fail and say the wrong thing. And and Dr. Burns is the one who gave me permission to be uncomfortable. She's like, it's okay to be uncomfortable because it's in that you have growth. And I was like, okay. But it was scary because it was at the height of the pandemic and we were all living in fear. But I say that because I think, folks, if you're listening, you got to go there and we got to start. And I am a perpetual lifelong learner. And I don't think anybody will ever be 100% culturally aware on anything unless it's their own personal lived experiences. And So I don't think the end goal should be competency in that, because I don't think we can hit competency in that. I think it should
You
be,
don't ever reach that.
yes, I think it should be a perpetual thirst for growth and betterment. Is that, what do you think?
Yeah, and that's why I love that, I love the framework of cultural humility over cultural competency, because there is no destination. The journey is a goal, not a destination. I think not engaging in a conversation is worse than engaging in a conversation wrong, whatever that means. Because when you do something wrong, it's wrong because there's going to be a consequence and you're going to learn from it, as uncomfortable as it is, and you're not going to do it again. When we won't even get to a place to talk about things, like the way they are banning I don't know how you can ban something that is not tangible. So keep trying. But we are going to ban DEI. We're going to ban talking about slavery. Not talking about slavery does not erase the history of slavery. Not talking about racism does not end racism. In fact, racism will never end. It's not about destination. It's about a journey to the destination. Racism will not ever end, but what can we do right now that moves us, that activates anti-racism, that makes us think about how racism is a part of every institution? I can go on and on about all the other, systemic forms of inequity, but I think we're so much on this ending point. And that's why I love cultural humility. There is no ending point. It is, I am committed. I am committed to keep learning about this for the rest of my life. I am committed to continuously reflect on my biases, to acknowledge my biases, to consider my biases, and then acknowledge them on a daily basis. And, it's so much of a journey that you can never possibly learn enough. You could never get to a place where I've done my work, I'm an expert. I don't even like when people are like, oh, DEI expert. I'm like, please don't call me that. I don't even know what that means. That by definition doesn't make sense. You cannot be an expert in this work.
I have a strong feeling on when people call themselves a feeding and swallowing expert, but they don't have board certification. And at least there's a terminal point for that. But if you don't have a certain set of alphabet soup behind your name, you're tiptoeing into the gray in the code of ethics there, if not completely over the line. So that is,
yeah. And I think in our field, we kind of really overemphasize, you need a niche and your specialty and what's I had a conversation with someone and they were like, I don't know if they asked me, what is your specialty or something? What is your area or whatever? And I was like, diversity, equity, inclusion. And they were like, no, that's not an area, articulation, swallowing, what's yours? I'm like, diversity, equity, inclusion. That is my lens for everything that I do. So I'm sorry you don't like my answer, but
well, I love it. I love it. Also, wait, I am dying. Y'all can't see this, but this woman above her left shoulder has a slew of books up there. Oh my God, it goes behind you.
Oh yes, a little curve and
and are they all children's books? Because from here it looks like
they're children's books. They're all children's books. So I even had a special delivery. One of the little girls we work with, her name is Maya, and she brought me these. She's written her own children's books, so she brought them to me, and she has makeup to go with it, and I have her little corner. So I am a book collector. We even started next door to me. There was an empty room, and so we created an equity engagement space. So it's a library for the college to engage and use our diverse books. So I love it. I need to be in this environment. I need to feel it, so the books kind of help me.
I love that. Okay, y'all, if you haven't read it, one of my all-time favorite books, and I highly recommend it for our pediatric patients, is The Girl with Big, Big Feelings. Have you read that?
I have not read that.
Oh, Oh, get ready.
I have to get that.
It is such a good book. And my bear has big, big feelings. And he feels, I think it runs in our family. And I know that. We
Mm-hmm.
feel it. We feel the spirit. We feel the movement. We feel hurt a little deeper, a little more, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my bear has that big. But trying to process that as an 8-year-old boy when his reading level is up to 7th grade. So his comprehension is here, but he's still in this tiny little awkward body where he's,
Mm-hmm.
all kneecaps and feet, because one day he'll grow into the rest of it. And that child grew a full shoe size in 9 weeks. He's going through this growth spurt and living
Oh
off
my
of jars of
gosh.
peanut butter, and not a pound on him. But that book really helped us. And because it talks about how to process that. It was with big, big feelings. No, the girl with the big, big worry, because it's the boy with the big, big feelings and the girl with the big, big worry. But that is
Hmm.
highly recommend. It'd be a good
Oh,
addition to your collection. So,
yes, I have to add that. I love exploring these books. I think the last one, probably my newest one, is A Day with No Words, that has been quite popular in
I
our field.
love
And
that.
I just like boohooed after finally reading it. It's so beautiful. And it just made me think of all the children I have worked with that needed that book. And I'm so
Mhm.
grateful that it's out there in the atmosphere right now.
It hit New York Times bestsellers list.
Oh, I heard that.
Yes.
It should. It
Yes.
should.
Yes. Okay. 1, thank you for coming on. 2, I cannot wait to learn more from you. And 3, at the end of every episode, and I probably should have given you the heads up beforehand, but at the end of every episode, we always ask the guest if there's a scholarship, a grant, organization that somebody could donate to or tithe of their time and talents if they don't have any extra love money lying around. Who, what organization, where can we pay it forward to?
I just feel moved to shout out the National Black Association of Speech, Language, and Hearing. If I did not go to that conference as a graduate student, I would not be here. I would not have made it. I would have felt completely isolated and felt like this was not the field for me. And
Mhm.
so I am so eternally indebted to the organization. I absolutely love it. And right now we have a cultural humility conference that we're starting. It's going to be in the fall. I just encourage you, if you want to get involved with Mbasla, if you want to join, if you want to support in any way, please check out the website. Please get involved. You do not have to be a Black person to get involved to attend the convention. But I just really love this organization, and so much of my time goes into forwarding the mission of the organization because it's so close to my heart. So I think I
Oh,
would like to just shout that out.
I am a member, everybody, so I highly recommend joining. The Cultural Humility Virtual Conference is October 14th, 2023, from 9
Yes.
a.m. to 5 p.m. They have the call for papers will have concluded by time we go
Well,
live.
yes, the call for papers will be over, but you can attend the conference. We also have an ambassador program along with the conference. So the ambassador program is basically kind of like a cohort feel if you want to learn about cultural humility in depth. So attending the conference would just be a part of it, but there'll also be an opportunity to earn 20 CEUs. So you're engaging in asynchronous and synchronous work throughout the course of the year. But the conference is going to be 6 CEUs in October. So please support, please come. It's our first one. We've been working really hard on this.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on and
Thank
for
you for
doing your
having
work.
me.
Yes. And I'm going to hit stop because I have a few ideas.
Okay.
Feeding Matters guides system-wide changes by uniting caregivers, professionals, and community partners under the Pediatric Feeding Disorder Alliance. So what is this alliance? The Alliance is an open access collaborative community focused on achieving strategic goals within 3 focus areas: education, advocacy, and research. So who is the Alliance? It's you. The Alliance is open to any person passionate about improving care for children with a pediatric feeding disorder. To date, 187 professionals, caregivers, and partners have joined the Alliance. You can join today by visiting the Feeding Matters website at www.feedingmatters.org. Click on PFD Alliance tab and sign up today. Change is possible when we work together. That's a wrap, folks. Once again, thank you for listening to First Bite, fed, fun, and functional. I'm your humble but yet sassy host, Michelle Dawson, the All Things Peds SLP. This podcast is part of a course offered for continuing education through speechtherapypd.com. Please check out the website if you'd like to learn more about CEU opportunities for this episode, as well as the ones that are archived. And as always, remember, feed your mind, feed your soul, be kind, and feed those babies.